Hi everyone, and welcome back to the neighborhood. Today, we're looking at the FiiO R7, thanks in part to MRS, or Mark, over at Super Reviews. I really thank him for supporting this channel and sending this unit in for review. Let's get into it. So I was instantly attracted to the FiiO R7 when it first came out. You see, I'm a sucker for DACs that implement Ethernet, as I stream with Roon, and this offers me a ton of versatility in my home. I just find that Ethernet generally also just transmits a less corruptible audio signal, so I'm always in favor of using it where and when I can. Ultimately, there aren't many DACs under $1,000 that feature it. So when this FiiO released with a Roon-ready touchscreen interface at a price of $699, I was excited. It also sports a THX AAA 788 amplifier with 5 gain stages, 3.6 watts of output power, and a variety of balanced and unbalanced outputs for headgear and other devices. It can be used as a fixed line out, a pre-out, a headphone out, or both a pre-out and headphone out at the same time, selectable via the lower knob on the front of the unit. But be advised, plugging in a headphone in pre-out/headphone out mode does not disable the pre-out functions from the back of the unit. The top knob adjusts the volume from left to right and enters an output selection screen when held down. It also wakes up the device from slumber with a single press and returns to the home screen with additional presses. To use this device with Roon, one has to enter a separate application from the input/mode selection screen. I would have liked to be able to enter Roon and begin playback automatically from devices such as my computer or phone, as I can do this with my Goldnote DS10, but on the R7 the Roon-ready application has to be running for the device to be recognized. It was also somewhat clunky to switch to a different output mode from the Roon-ready application, as other output modes had a built-in icon that you could access via the touchscreen. But from the Roon-ready application, the only way to access the selection screen was via a long press and hold of the top knob. Overall, I just found the software to be a tad bit confusing, unuser-friendly, and somewhat clunky in its general execution. For example, there was an observable lag at the beginning of some tracks at times, especially when the device would switch codecs from one to another. Perhaps the Snapdragon 660 can be optimized with further firmware updates by FiiO, but as things stand at this time of this review, the interface needs some work in my opinion. And I mean, FiiO is doing this. There were at least 2 firmware updates while I had the device in for testing for this review. Speaking of codecs, the R7 makes use of the ES9068AS, which is capable up to 32-bit, 384 kHz PCM, DSD256, and decodes and renders MQA. There's even an all-DSD mode for those that prefer to send out a codec that is converted to all-DSD all the time. Regarding power handling, I found that due to its 5 gain stages, I had no problem running sensitive IMs and most high impedance cans. But the internal, dual, THX AAA 788 Plus amplifiers were not powerful enough to drive my 600 ohm DT880 Special Editions, even balanced, but were strong enough to drive the 470 ohm Japanese R70X, as well as a number of other 300 ohm headphones, such as the Sennheiser 6XX and 8XX. In testing sensitive IMs like the Orchestra Lite and the KZ-ZSX, the R7 produced a black background on low gain, but I could still observe some noise floor if the gain was not on the lowest setting. But diving deeper into the sound, it's here where I have my biggest gripes with the R7. Does it sound bad? No. No, it doesn't. I mean, it sounds pretty good. But does it sound $700 good? No, not really. Generally speaking, it lacks emotion at times, and there is some peculiar, mild harshness and grit and grain to the sound, which is most glaring in the upper mids. Both vocals and guitars were noteworthy offenders. This was particularly evident and troublesome on more revealing gear. Using the R7 as a DAC, feeding into an integrated Circle Labs A200 amplifier, driving a set of Wolfgang Logness Sones, this is a very revealing system. and it was fairly obvious that the FiiO R7 was the weak point in the chain. It may not be a fair comparison, as it's currently at least twice the price of the R7, even when on sale, but my Goldnote DS10 smashes this in terms of sonic performance. And it's not even close. Now, the Goldnote screen is not a touchscreen, and it cannot display album art like the FiiO can, but it functions better with Roon and sounds much better than the FiiO otherwise. With the Woofone Longless Zones field coil dipole speakers putting on a show, as they tend to do, there was no harshness coming from the DAC of the Goldnote, while mid-range and treble harshness were clearly evident with the R7. Honestly, I was genuinely let down by the performance of the R7 to a certain extent. I had hoped that it might keep up with the sonic performance of my old SU8, which is a much cheaper DAC around $200 from SMSL. And although the R7's performance was closer to that DAC, if I had to pick between the two, I would still likely take the SU8 based on its sonic performance alone. Using the R7 at the review desk with my Cesaro Mini Wagners, which is another revealing speaker system powered by my Sprout 100, I had to put my Dark Voice 336 in the chain as a preamp to add some tube goodness and tamp down on the harsh character of the R7's upper mid-range. And don't get me wrong, the harshness here with the R7 might pass many people's listening tests with an acceptable rating. But in the end, it's a deal breaker for me, and it's simply just not good enough to remain in my system for a long period of time. I also tested a number of high-end headphones I own or had into the channel for review, including the Rawson Audio Rad Zero, the Meze Empyrean, and the Aria Stealth. The mellow warm character and easy-to-drive nature of the Rad Zero made it a particularly good match for the R7, as it also curbed some of the negative aspects of the sound profile, which we discussed already. The Aria Stealth, being a bit more transparent, was not generally as pleasant on the R7 as it is on other devices. It really displayed the problems that I have with this device, and it fatigued me to listen to it for prolonged periods of time. I will note, however, that it sounded significantly better sounding with the R7 being employed purely as a DAC, driving the Aria Stealth with the 789. The Meze Empyrean was also able to mask some of the blemishes in the sound quality here or there, but I've also heard it sound much better. Of particular note, the bass here was a bit boomy and bloomed on occasion, going overboard on particular tracks. Now, FiiO does make an external power supply that works in conjunction with the R7, but despite trying to obtain one for both Atmos Audio and FiiO themselves, I was unable to get one in for a review in the end. Atmos could not source them, and FiiO would not send one to the channel for a reasonable price. My hope is that the power supply could both clean up the sound of the R7 and improve its ability to drive higher impedance cans. But without the power supply here for comparison, I could not accurately say either way. Positively, the tonality of the THX amps were some of the most neutral that I've come across. Yet, while it's a tad bit warmer and fuller compared to the 789, it's also a bit less exacting, less separative, not as spacious sounding, and comes across with less articulation within the presented soundscape. But I guess for an all-in-one unit, it comes close to matching the performance of separates. And on less revealing, lower-tier gear, the R7 kept up much better. Nevertheless, I have placed it in my main HeadFi system and lived with it as my main DAC for a few weeks for the sake of this review. But when this review is over with, I won't say that I will be sad to see it go. Still, with some additional firmware updates and perhaps FiiO's power supply, which I wasn't able to test, I might be convinced to change my mind in the future, as its performance was potentially close to being good enough to stay. It's just not quite there as it stands. Maybe the R7 Mark II will be better. Thanks again to MRS with Super Review for sending in the R7 to the channel for review. I'll put a link to his channel in the description below, and before you go, make sure to smash that subscribe button, give a big old thumbs up on this video, and leave a comment to help with the algorithm. I'll also place links to all neighborhood access locations in the description below, so make sure you give me a follow there as well. And with that, I'm out for now.